Reflections on the passing of the former Finance Minister, and I'm now joined by Deputy Finance Minister, Dr. David Masondo. Dr. Masondo, thank you so much for making time and coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Well, it'd be nice to have this initial engagement on a separate matter, but obviously it is the untimely passing of Tito Mboweni. What comes to mind for you when you think of Tito Mboweni?
Firstly, let me convey our condolences to the Mboweni family, his relatives, and all South Africans, because indeed this is a sad loss, not only to the Mboweni family, but to South Africa and the world. What comes to mind, it's actually very interesting that before he passed on, he's been working on his memo. And he's been giving me the memo for me to look at it, give him feedback. So there's a lot in that memo. And so what comes to my mind, it's someone who's really contributed significantly to the liberation of South Africa, but specifically working on the kind of economic policies we should be implementing in the post-apartheid South Africa. And in my conversations with him, he will take me through what the thinking was in 1986, the thinking was in 1988, till to the ready to govern. And fortunately, I had an opportunity also to work with him on the economic strategy that he led when he was the Minister of Finance, which became the basis upon which we are undertaking a lot of structural reforms in the current period.
Now, we've had multiple conversations with both members of the ANC, those he worked with in government, and also those that he worked with in the private sector. And there is a common thread around his level of diligence, his vision, and obviously some of those values that translated into the incredible figure that he was in the space in which he worked. What for you are some of those values that were outstanding for Tito Mboweni?
He was very diligent indeed, and intelligent and strategic. So it's not by accident that Mandela picked him up at a very early age and made him Minister of Labour, and he later became the governor of the central bank in South Africa, and he introduced inflation targeting, and he was very clear in his mind that the runaway inflation reduces poor households' income, their capacity to buy goods in the market get eroded if the inflation is high. And he was very clear and interested in making sure that our macroeconomic policy does protect your income, my income, so that it doesn't get eroded by the runaway inflation. And he was finance minister. He was very clear that we need to sort out the debt levels. Debt in itself, it's not bad, but the problem is, can the economy afford to service that debt, and what are you borrowing for? And he's been very clear that we can't keep on borrowing to bail out SOEs. And he's been very clear on that, and he has saved us a lot. He's made a huge contribution in bringing the message home that the debt levels need to be put at a sustainable level. And he used to use this hippopotamus analogy. He would say, no, you know, the hippopotamus mouth is growing. And in that way, he will be explaining that our expenditure is growing, but our revenue is going that way. So the hippopotamus, the mouth, the gap is growing significantly, and we've got to find a way of. So he had a very interesting ways of making, sending messages around the financial information and ratios in very interesting ways for an ordinary person to understand.
I'm keen to know about your own dealings with him. I mean, you've talked about having sight of his memoir. I'm hoping that you can give us a glance or a glean into some of those things that weren't public knowledge that we'd like to know about the late Tito Mboweni. But there's also been a description of Tito Mboweni having been a very hard man, very difficult to when his mind was set on something, that was it. You know, there was there could have been an abrasiveness that was, I suppose, needed when you're finance minister or Reserve Bank governor. But he's also been described as a larger-than-life character. I mean, we saw him engage with him on X or on Twitter, and he was this fun-loving individual who loved to cook.
Cooking was his, as we know, he loved cooking. And I will visit him at this place in Mahobasloof. I wouldn't comment much about the quality of his cooking, but he loved his own cooking, and everyone who did not find the product of his cooking palatable, he would say, no, the problem is your taste bud. It's not my chef cooking capability. So he was a very jolly leader, jolly intellectual who combined fun and seriousness at the same time. And he was a very upfront, a very honest person. What he tells you, he really means it. And if he says, I'm going to do it, take it as done.
So let's talk about his legacy. What sort of legacy does he leave?
The immediate one is the structural reforms. So he said, look, guys, our economy is not growing. And part of the reason why our economy is not growing is on the supply side, the supply of electricity, telecommunications, freight, logistics skills. And he said, look, we've got to undertake structural reforms. So in the context of electricity, his argument was that it cannot be right, and it's been proven right by the performance of Eskom, that it cannot be right that we only have one source of energy in South Africa. It's important for us to open up that market to allow other private sectors to generate energy. So he saw the critical role of the private sector in our network industries. And I think the reforms that we've undertaken, which the current government is also undertaking, pursuing, the structural reform that we're undertaking, it's one of his own immediate contributions. But his contribution in the economic thought, in the ANC, including the ready to govern, and the final adoption of the RDP by the ANC, he was quite critical in that, including the labor market reforms, the labor laws that we have. Workers today are fairly protected in the labor market against abuse, precisely because he was quite central in driving the labor market reforms in the post-apartheid South Africa.
Dr. Masondo, you indicated that Madiba found him as a young man and found him to be a capable individual, right? And it almost speaks to the general absence of young people in the political sphere. What can we learn from his success in government as a young individual at the time, I'd imagine, and the need to be more engaging where young people are concerned, who potentially have solutions for South Africa?
What we learn from Tito Mboweni is that you cannot lead if you don't understand how the world works, because it's out of that understanding that you'll be in a better position to provide well, intellectually, theoretically grounded a solution. So therefore, education for young people must take education very, very seriously, because if you look at his journey, educational journey, starting from Teflop, he goes to the University of Lesotho, he goes abroad, and he studied. He's someone who's forever engaged, and rhetoric, empty slogans was not his stuff. Rigor and a very well-informed policy prescription was what Tito Mboweni represented. And young people must learn from that.
Now, final thoughts. Tito Mboweni's impact and influence was not just about South Africa, but the continent as well. how much will the rest of the continent miss Tito Mboweni?
The continent will miss him. You know, there are moments when he will come back and say, no, David, I was in this country, I was in this country, this is the issue that I was dealing with. And unfortunately, let's see what comes out of his memoir, because I do think that he was also doing a lot of work on the continent and shaping. I mean, he was a Pan-Africanist, not from the point of view of just Africa as geography, but also outside the continent. He really took seriously the continent, its integration as a basis for economic development. He was very excited with the African continental free trade, but he kept on saying, you do need to think about the monetary union that need to be put in place so that you facilitate that trade. You need to think about the infrastructure that you require so that the goods that are produced in Tanzania, in Egypt, in South Africa, they can be taken from one place to the other with ease.
And finally, before we let you go, Dr. Masondo, just anything from that memoir that you care to share?
I think it would be fair to first have a conversation with the family on how they will want us to take that memoir forward. At this stage, it will be fair just to wait for the permission of the family. He just passed away yesterday. And one thing that immediately came to my mind was this memoir, which I kept on giving feedback on him. And I'm sure there's others as well who have been working with him on this memoir. So, but at this stage, I will be led by the family on how this memoir should be dealt with. It's the family property now.
Fair enough. Appreciate it. Thanks, Dr. Masondo, for coming onto the show.
Thanks so much, man.
And that was Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masondo, speaking to us about the passing of Tito Mboweni.